with these tunings in mind and what they're hearing, then yeah, I think it would make a lot of sense. It'd be great. It would make music so much better than what it currently is.
Hi, my name is David Summerhays. I'm a piano tuner based out of Montreal, Quebec, although originally from Chicago. And when I bought this big, awesome piano behind me, I got really interested in different kinds of tuning, but I was having trouble explaining to people I tune for what's the difference and why they should care. So I came across Carl Radford's wonderful videos, and I basically sent him some fan mail. And I said, listen, I have some questions about what your experience has been working with folks and trying to explain tunings to them. I could just ask you, or I could interview you, and I bet other people would enjoy the conversation just as much as I did. So have a listen. What's interesting to me, to hear you talk about it, it sounds to me like you're saying the interest of historical tunings is like primarily historical, in the sense that we have these fabulous composers from the past that were expressing so much more than we can get across in equal temperament. I guess I'm also interested in thinking about the way, I don't know, when I explain equal temperament to people as a concept, compared to, let's say, Victorian temperament, where you keep some key color, most people say to me, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And I wonder how much, let's say, digital music is using equal temperament, digital pianos are using, so how much music is using this equal temperament, and how much more expression can we unlock in all kinds of music, jazz, all kinds of things, by thinking about key color a little bit more? Like, to me, it's broader than historical music, although I think historical music also needs to be unlocked for multiple reasons. So I guess I'm getting to this question of, what's your conversation like with people about this? What are you recommending to people that don't know anything and say, I want my piano tuned?
Well, you're asking two different questions. One is, what do I recommend and how do I pitch it to them? And the other one is where's music going with these temperaments?
Yeah.
Let's start with the first one. So when I enter somebody's home, I'll ask them what they play. If they're playing jazz or if they're playing show tunes, I'm going to give them equal temperament, because that's what the composers of those genres composed in, probably. And if they started hearing all these wild thirds in those tunings, in those genres, they would not hire me again. So I will typically, I'll look and if they're not there, I'll look and see what kind of music I see around the piano, but I'll typically ask them, and if they are a classical musician and they're playing a lot of classical music, then I'll say, we're doing lately. Would you like to have your piano tuned into a classical tuning for your piano? And they'll say, oh, what's that? And I'll explain, well, the modern tuning is all the keys are the same. And this one it's kind of like going from black and white TV to color TV. It opens up a whole new world, and you all of a sudden hear this emotion that you didn't know was in the music. And they go, yeah, I kind of like to try that. And so they might try it, and most of the time they'll like it. There are a few occasions when somebody says, yeah, let's go back to the other tuning. 9 times out of 10, those people who want to go back, the next time I'm there, they'll say, let's go back to well temperament, because I'm missing what I was hearing before. But it depends on what they're playing. If they're playing a lot of modern music, Schoenberg, or more contemporary composers, then they're probably not going to enjoy the well temperaments as much. So that's kind of how I approach it. And if they're saying, well, I'm playing mostly classical, but I play some jazz, then I'll say, well, let's try a little milder version of it. Let's try a Victorian tuning or something like that, so that you still get the key color, but you don't get the more wild note intervals and wild intervals, and that I like very much Victorian tuning with jazz and show tunes. It works great, and I think that's not a problem at all.
And it's so subtle. The communication piece is really hard. It's subtle, and yet everyone feels it on some level. Yeah.
There are some tuners who just give them what they feel is they should have. If they think that they're playing a lot of classical, I'll give them a classical tuning, but I'm not going to tell them. And that I hear that a fair amount, and most people won't know the difference. They'll like the tuning or whatever, but they won't really, And some people think, well, if I try to explain them, they're not going to understand anyway. So why, especially if somebody's a beginning musician and isn't going to understand them, even if you explain it technically at all. And I always try to steer away from explaining anything technically, because it's just, unless it's rare are the people that can understand that, because there's just too much tuning theory and physics theory involved with trying to explain that. So it doesn't, I just don't even try most of the time. And there are occasions though when somebody will understand, they'll ask some pretty astute questions, and then I'm like, okay, let's go into it. What was it? Somebody asked me the other day. He said, I forget what they asked, but it was a very technically involved question. I'm like, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
He says, I'm here all day. I'm like, well, I have other appointments, but we got into it a little bit. And so, yeah, that's fun for me. I mean, I enjoy doing that, but it is rare.
Okay. I think personally I'm coming to a point where I think I'd prefer a light Victorian tuning over equal temperament pretty much any time, any case. I just find it sterile. I just don't think it sounds as interesting. And it doesn't have to be crazy, wobbly notes. It just means a little bit of color as you transpose and move around. I honestly don't recommend equal temperament for anybody.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think that's valid. I think it works for Victorian. A good Victorian tuning works for almost everything. So I think that's valid. And I know another technician who does the same thing, and he actually doesn't like the more wobbly, as you say, well temperaments. He'll only use the Victorian tuning, and then there are those tuners who do that, and that's fine too. That's kind of the nice thing about all of this, is that there's not one size fits all. I think I mentioned that to you before. It's a very subjective thing. It really is. I mean, it's personal taste. There's even one tuning here in this big red book that Owen has. It's called, you can tune the Thomas Young tuning to suit your personal taste. And depending on how much you tune the first interval, wide or sharp, or, it'll become more or less, the wider you tune the first interval, the more it becomes like a Victorian tuning. And the narrower you tune it, the more it becomes more of a classic well temperament. And so you can suit it to your own personal taste. If you're in a concert situation where you want more brightness to the piano, you can, adapt it to that. And so it's very subjective. And that's part of what I enjoy about it, because, we don't know what a lot of the composers used. So there is a certain amount of subjectivity to it, trying to figure out what it is they might have used. And there's no right answer in a lot of the cases. We don't really know. As far as your other question as to where music can go with these kinds of tunings, I think it depends. As composers are more aware of it, then if they have their pianos tuned to these kinds of tunings and start composing with that in mind, or arranging pieces with these tunings in mind and what they're hearing, then I think it would make a lot of sense. It'd be great. It would make music so much better than what it currently is. When I do I do a little bit of arranging of pieces, just for my own enjoyment. And, some keys will lend themselves to the piece and others won't. And so I'll make sure that I put it in a key that makes sense with that, whatever I'm trying to convey with that piece. And I think as composers become aware of it, they'll utilize it more.
So maybe it's probably less interesting to musicians, but I am curious as a technician how you learned to do them. Did you say you just read from the book, or Owen Jorgensen taught you? I mean, that's the source right there. He's the guy.
I didn't learn it from anyone else, because there was no one else that was doing this when I started doing it. I mean, around my area. Mm-hmm. And Owen was too far away. I would write him and ask him questions, but he's on another level. I mean, he's gone now, unfortunately, many years. But you'd go to his classes at conventions and talk to him, and he would speak on a totally different plane, talking about syntonic commas and ratios and things like that. That I don't even know what a syntonic comma was back then, and you'd have to really pay attention. You'd maybe get a tenth of what he was talking about. He was just completely on a different level, and that was amazing. So to get anything out of him that was really useful to a beginner was difficult. But his books, however, you could kind of open it up and read it, and if you read through it, then things start to click a little bit. And his tuning methods, he has a lot of books out. I mean, maybe 5 or 7 books out. And some are pamphlets more and teach the equal beating methods or the more historical methods. Tuners back in that day would tune in a different way than we do now. They tune more by feel and by comparison rather than by beats like we do now. And so, and still musicians today who tune their own harpsichords or whatever will do that way. They'll divide the syntonic comma a certain way, and they can understand it that way. And that's, for me, since I was trained to tune by beats, that's difficult for me. But this big red book, it has instructions that teach you how to tune by beats as well. So it'll say, tune this interval 5 beats per second or whatever. And that I grasped. And then after you've done it, gone through the temperament, then you tune it out and listen to what it sounds like and listen to the chords and how it affects the music. And you say, oh, I like that, I don't like that, and okay, well, maybe this isn't the right tuning for me, I'll try something else. And I did that a lot. I tried a lot of different temperaments. I can't even guess, maybe 20, 30 different temperaments before I kind of landed on some that I really liked. And it's just trial, I hate to say trial and error, but it kind of is. And like I said, they're easier to tune than equal temperament, so it's not a big grunt. I mean, like equal temperament, the first time you do it, it takes years to get it down, and that's not the case with these well temperaments. It's easier to tune actually a pure interval than it is a really tempered interval, and these classical tunings have more pure intervals in them, so that's without any beats, and that's easier to do than finding the exact beat rate of a particular interval. We're probably getting too technical for most people, so I don't know.
I think this interests tuners more. I think a lot of tuners these days now have these electrical things where you can say, Volati? What's that? I don't know, but let's find out. And that's so different than what it sounds like you did.
Right, and they're great today. A lot of those devices do a fantastic job, but what you lose in the process of that is when you actually tune it by ear, by orally, you hear the relationships in a different way. It's not just chromatically note by note and then testing it out afterwards. You have to understand the chords, and it's the same as the technicians or the musicians, I should say, who tuned their own instruments 200 years ago. They were listening for chords. They were listening for sonorities and relationships. They weren't listening for beats, and they certainly weren't following, a meter on a device. So they're listening for the musicality, and I think even if you learn how to tune or do these temperaments with an electronic device, that's fine, but I think it's also important to learn how to do it orally so that at least a couple times that you have a grasp of what you're doing, because otherwise you're traveling blind. And it's the same with equal temperament. I mean, you can tune equal temperament with a device just fine, but until you really have tuned it quite a bit orally, you're really flying blind, if that makes any sense.
I only tune by ear. I've never tuned with a device. But again, if I want to do alternate tunings, the instructions are not exactly easy to find, and it doesn't mean they're very good necessarily, the ones you find. I've been looking up how to tune mean tone, and even that I was like, no, I don't know. They're just like estimating octaves and things like that. And for a piano tuner, it's not good enough. They're even estimating like A for A whatever from their pitch source, and I'm just like, these people aren't very good.
Yeah, well, you definitely have to be careful of where you get your information in that regard. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly steer you in some of the right directions for that. So
That'd be great.
yeah.
All right. Well, that's the technical section. So we were saying you don't meet many piano tuners knocking door to door, let's say, but the same among piano tuners who are interested in historical tunings is even more rare. I would say 1 in 10.
It varies quite a bit. Some people are staunch, they equal temperament or nothing, and they're very, very, clear about that. And there is nothing else as far as they're concerned, and that's fine. That's no problem with that if they want to do that. But that's partly because of the way the guild has, since its inception, has used the equal temperament as the testing tool. If you can tune equal temperament, you can tune anything because it's the hardest temperament to tune. So, I mean, if you've done that, the historical tunings are so much easier to tune. But I think that's a lot of the reason, because we're so taught to learn this kind of tuning, and this is the gold standard. And it's not until the last 20, 25 years that the classical tunings and the historical tunings have really started coming back more into the spotlight. And so people are slow to adapt, and I think as slow as piano technicians are, pianists themselves have been even slower. It's hard to explain to the average pianist about tuning. They sort of eyes glaze over, and they don't want to, until they understand and hear what a profound difference it makes in their playing and their musicality. Then all of a sudden the light goes on. But you have to explain that to them in a different way than to piano technicians. But I think piano technicians are coming along quite a bit, and at least in this area, I think there's quite a few. It definitely is regional. I mean, some areas are picked up on it more than others, and I think that's just part of mentorism. My big mentor was Owen Jorgensen, and he's not that, he's the next state over. And so I think that kind of, this area is more, you find more people that will tune historical tunings. And I think probably in Europe you'll find more too. I'm guessing, but I don't know that for a fact. But yeah, it's definitely started to catch on, but it's gradual.
Well, I think you've answered pretty much every question I can think of.
Thank you so much for doing this. This was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it.
Pleasure. Me too. I'm so excited to see what becomes of this, and thanks so much.
Thank you too. All right. Bye, David.